clocks are lying. Remember that. If you hear nothing else, remember that. My name was Probator Cassian Valerius. My duty was to record the end of the world. This is not that report. This is a warning.
I remember the smell. Before the screaming, before the slow, creeping dark, before the great, silent bells fell from the sky, it was the smell that told us we were already dead. It's not a smell of decay. Not exactly. It's older than that. It's the scent of dust that has settled for 1,000,000 years. It's the taste of forgotten metal, of rust not as corrosion, but as a kind of exhalation. It's the cloying, sweet thickness of air that has been breathed and rebreathed through lungs that are not your own. It smells of endings that were written before our sun first ignited. They call it the Hrud migration, a dry, academic term. It sounds like the movement of birds or caribou across a tundra. It suggests a pattern, a predictability. It is a lie. A migration implies a point A and a point B. But the Hrud, they are not traveling to somewhere. They are an event, a slow, patient, geological scale unmaking. And they didn't so much invade Terra as they seeped into her. Like a stain on parchment, spreading until the words of our history were no longer legible. My name was Probator Cassian Valerius of the Adeptus Terra. My duty was to record, to observe, to log the end of the world. This is not my official report. That document is ash, or perhaps it has been translated into a substance I can no longer comprehend. This is a confession, a whisper into the dark, in the hope that someone, somewhere, in a time that still flows in a straight line, will hear it and understand. Listen to me. The clocks are lying. In the beginning, we called it the temporal leakage, a comically inadequate phrase. The Ordo Chronos detected it first, a statistical anomaly in the celestial mechanics of the outer system. A planetoid's orbit was aging rapidly. It was completing millennia of gravitational decay in a matter of weeks. We thought it was a Xenos weapon. We were not entirely wrong. The first sign on Terra herself was in the deep under-arcologies, the foundations of the hive cities that plunged into the planet's crust. Workers reported tools feeling heavy, not with weight, but with years. A new forged wrench would be left on a pipe overnight, and by morning, it would be pitted with rust, its calibrations worn to uselessness. We dismissed it. Maintenance failure. Poor materials. Then the whispers started. Not voices, you understand. Not at first. It was a whisper of time itself. You'd walk down a corridor you'd patrolled 1,000 times, and for a single, gut-wrenching moment, the permacrete under your boot would feel like ancient, crumbling sandstone. The air would taste of tombs. You'd blink, and it would be gone. But the aftertaste remained. A phantom senescence. Our rituals tightened. Of course they did. This is the Imperium. Ritual is our shield, our sword, our sanity. The daily litanies of activation for the plasma conduits became longer, more fervent. The sacred oils used to anoint the machinery were applied in triple measure. We burned more incense, chanted more loudly, thinking the faith in our voices could ward off this creeping, silent wrongness. It only seemed to feed it. I was assigned to the anomaly, as it was then known, stationed in the central administrative spire of the Hymenogard arcology, a needle of adamantium and faith stabbing into the smog-choked sky. My world became a cycle of dread. My mornings began with the scent of recalf that now always carried a faint, metallic tang, like licking an old coin. The taste would linger on my tongue for hours. My duty was to review picked feeds from the lower levels. And that's where I saw the first true change. Not in the objects, but in the people. There was a man, a low-level servitor overseer named Griel. I watched him on the feeds for weeks. At first, he was just a man, stern, tired, doing his duty. Then, I noticed his movements were slowing. Not like a man tired, but like a clockwork toy winding down. His gestures became stiff, deliberate. His blink would take a second, then 2, then 5. He'd stand to address a worker, and he would remain standing, arm half raised, for minutes at a time, while the workers scurried around him, their faces masks of terror. They thought he was being insubordinate. They reported him. When the Arbites came, they found him in that same pose. They touched his shoulder, and his body crumbled. Not into dust, but into a desiccated, leathery thing, his face a taut scream, his eyes gone milky and vacant. The official report listed it as sudden-onset cellular degeneration, a medical term for a thing that was anything but medical. That was the day the screaming started in the walls. It wasn't a human scream. It was the sound of metal under stresses it was never meant to bear, the groan of a continent settling, the shriek of time itself being twisted. It would come at irregular intervals, a wave of sonic agony that would vibrate through the adamantium bones of our spire. We'd clutch our ears, our teeth rattling, our vision blurring. And after it passed, things would be worse. A section of the spire's outer hull would be pitted and scarred, as if it had weathered 1,000 years of acid storms in an instant. A bank of data slates would be fused together, their screens dark, their casings warped into a single, useless lump of plastic and metal. And someone would always be missing. A clerk who had just been fetching a data wafer. A guardsman at his post. They would simply be gone. And in their place, a stain on the floor, a vaguely human-shaped shadow of dust and rust. Our rituals became more desperate. We painted warding sigils on the walls and sacred unguents that cost a fortune per vial. The ecclesiarchy priests marched through the halls in endless processions, swinging censers so thick with incense that the air became a solid, choking fog. They chanted until their voices were raw, their lips cracked and bleeding. I remember looking into the eyes of one such priest, a man named Deacon Hull, a firebrand known for his unshakable faith. The incense smoke wreathed his head, and in the flickering lumen light, I saw not conviction, but a raw, animal terror. He was chanting the litanies of protection, but his eyes were darting around, watching the shadows between the pillars, which seemed to be deepening, lengthening, as if they were stretching away into impossible distances. He met my gaze for a fraction of a second, and in that silent exchange, we confessed the truth to one another. Our rituals were not holding the horror at bay. They were simply making a more appealing target. That was the day the sky changed. The primary orbital defense grid, the lion's roar, a ring of battle stations that had guarded Terra since the siege itself, simply failed. Not with explosions, but with silence. One moment, their auspex signatures were a steady, comforting drumbeat in the command citadel. The next, a deafening silence. The picked feeds from the stations showed nothing but static, but the long-range telescopic arrays showed the truth. The stations were still there, but they were ancient. Wreathed in cobwebs of their own decaying metal, pitted and scarred, their gun barrels drooping like wilted flowers. They had aged 100,000 years in a single, held breath. That was the first true panic. The kind that cannot be contained by bolter or threat of court-martial. The kind that eats into the soul. The great gates of the inner palaces sealed. We, in the outer spires, were abandoned. Cast adrift in a sinking ship. In the Hrud, we began to see them. Not clearly. Never clearly. They are creatures of the distorted medium they create. You would see them in the periphery of your vision, a slithering, a coiling shadow that defied geometry. They moved in a way that hurt the mind, a liquid, boneless motion that seemed to ignore the very laws of physics. They didn't walk, they poured themselves from one point to another. Their bodies were a tapestry of decay. I saw one, just once, in the central atrium. The air around it shimmered like a heat haze, and within that haze, I saw a tall, thin figure, draped in rags that were themselves made of rust and entropy. Its skin was pale, sagging, covered in weeping sores that were not infections, but chronological abscesses. Its limbs were too long, too many-jointed, and it moved with a slow, inexorable grace, like a river of oil flowing uphill. It held a staff, from which dangled things. Bits of metal, chunks of rock, and what looked like a human skull, so aged it was barely more than a lump of chalk. It didn't attack. It didn't even look at the screaming people running past it. It simply was. And where it was, reality softened. The floor around its feet warped, the clean lines of the tiles flowing like melted wax. A potted fern near it withered, bloomed, withered again, and crumbled to dust in a cycle that took less than 10 seconds. The very air grew cold and thick, and that smell, That god-awful smell of ancient dust and metabolic waste became overpowering. That's when the real transformations began. The horror was no longer just an external force. It was becoming internal. I saw a woman, a data scribe, trapped in the field of one of these creatures. She was trying to run, but her legs were slowing, stiffening. She looked down at her hands, and she screamed. Her skin was wrinkling, sagging, her nails yellowing and curling. In moments, she was a hunched, elderly crone, her uniform hanging loose on a skeletal frame. She took another step, and her body could no longer support itself. She collapsed into a pile of brittle bones and desiccated flesh. But her scream, it seemed to linger, stretched out into a thin, high whine that echoed in that distorted space long after she was gone. This was their weapon. This was their migration. Not lasers and bombs, but the simple, unbearable weight of time. They accelerate entropy. They are a catalyst for the universe's inevitable slide into silence and heat death. And we were just fuel. My own descent began in the archives. I was tasked, futilely, with securing the most ancient records, the vellum scrolls and data crystals that held the deeds of the Primarchs and the God Emperor himself. I thought, in my foolishness, that the weight of history here would provide some protection. I was wrong. It was a feast. The archive chamber was a cathedral of knowledge, miles of shelves carved into the living rock of the Himalaya. When I entered, the air was already wrong. It was too still, too cold. The usual hum of the climate control stasis fields was absent. In its place was that same dissonant heartbeat. Lube-dub, lube-dub. It was coming from the walls. I walked down an aisle flanked by shelves of ancient battle plate, relics from the Great Crusade. The ceramite, once proud and bright, was now flaking, pitted, the colors faded to a uniform, sickly gray. As I passed, I saw the helmet of a suit of Mark IV armor twitch. Its neck seal, brittle with age, cracked, and the helmet tilted, as if the long-dead warrior within was turning to look at me. From the dark of the islands, a slow stream of black, viscous fluid seeped out, dripping onto the stone floor with a sound like a ticking clock. Tick, tick, tick. I ran. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a pathetic, biological counter-rhythm to the slow, monstrous heartbeat of the Hrud corruption. I stumbled into the main scriptorium, a vast hall where 1,000 scribe servitors should have been scratching quills on parchment. They were all still at their desks. But they were changed. Their flesh had sagged and fused with the wood and metal of their desks. Their quill hands were now just bony claws, frozen in the act of writing, the parchment before them blank and covered in a thick, gray mold. They were not dead. I could see the faint, slow rise and fall of their chests, a respiration that took minutes for a single breath. They were embedded in their own personal time loops, living out an eternity of a single, frozen moment. And in the center of the hall stood a Hrud, taller than the others I had glimpsed. It was attended by a swirling, silent cloud of what I can only describe as ghosts. Not spirits. Not souls. These were temporal echoes. Phantoms of people and things that had been in this room, caught in the Hrud's field and replayed like a broken recording. I saw a scribe from a century ago, flickering, repeating the motion of dipping his pen. I saw a legionary of the Imperial Fists, a phantom from the siege, his form shimmering, raising a bolter that was no longer there. The Hrud seemed to be feeding on them, drinking the time they had lost. It turned its head towards me. It had no face, just a wrinkled, sagging mass of flesh, with a single, vertical slit that pulsed with a sickly greenish light. It didn't have eyes, but I felt its gaze. It was a gaze that did not see my body, but my duration. It saw the arc of my life from birth to death, and it found it pitifully short. Insignificant. It raised a clawed, skeletal hand and pointed at me. And it spoke. Its voice was not a sound. It was a sensation. It was the feeling of a grave's cold earth falling on your face. It was the dry crackle of a papyrus scroll turning to dust. It was the groan of a dying star. And it formed a single, clear concept directly into my mind. Joined the great curve. I felt a pull. A terrible, languid temptation. My muscles ached. My bones felt heavy. My mind, so frantic with terror, began to slow. How easy it would be to just stop, to let my clock run down, to become part of this eternal, silent migration, to be free of the fear, the pain, the desperate, futile struggle. I screamed. I don't know what I screamed. A prayer, a curse, my own name. I fired my last pistol. The beam, a bright lance of coherent light, entered the Hrud's temporal field and stretched. It became a thin, crimson thread, moving with infinite slowness, before it dissipated into nothingness. The act of violence, an event that should be instantaneous, was rendered impotent, drawn out over seconds it was never meant to occupy. The Hrud made a sound that might have been laughter, the sound of a glacier calving, of a mountain crumbling. It took a step towards me, not a step through space, but a step through time. It was suddenly just closer. The cold intensified. The smell of dust choked me. I turned and fled, a coward, a broken man. But as I ran, I knew I had been marked. Its gaze was a brand on my soul. I had been invited. And part of me, a deep, hidden, treacherous part, wanted to RSVP. The upper spire is gone now. The command structure, the Arbite's precincts silent. The comms chatter is a symphony of madness. Voices begging for help, chanting litanies, screaming as their signals degrade into static or slow, deep, drawn-out moans. The power fails for hours at a time. We live by the ghostly, shifting light of the Hrud's own bioluminescence, a sickly green and purple that paints the corroded walls in nightmare colors. My own memories are fracturing. I try to remember my mother's face, the sun on the agri domes of my homeworld, the taste of Amasek. But the images are blurred, bleached. The Hrud's influence is a slow acid, eating away at my past. Soon, I will have no yesterday. I will only have the endless, decaying now. I have taken refuge in a small chapel, dedicated to some long-forgotten saint. The statue of the saint is now a melted, featureless blob of stone. The altar cloth is a web of dust. I sit here, in the silence, and I write this. Not on a data slate. The energy fields are too unstable, but with a real quill on real parchment I found in the archives. It feels appropriate. Primitive. Like me. I am so tired. Not the tiredness of a man who needs sleep, but the tiredness of a rock, of a star, of the universe itself. My body feels thin. Stretched. Sometimes, I look at my hand, and I see the wall through it. Just for a second. A trick of the light, I tell myself. But I know it's not. The deacon, Hull, found his way here yesterday. Or was it a week ago? Time has no meaning. He was a shattered man. His fine robes were tattered, his eyes wide with a terror that had burned away all sanity. They are not demons, Valerius, he rasped, clutching my arm with a grip like cold iron. The rituals, the faith, it's just noise to them. Pleasant noise. We are singing hymns to the cancer that is eating us. He babbled about the Hrud's god. Not a god of war or pestilence, but a god of ending. A final, universal constant. The great attractor at the end of time, pulling all things towards it. The Hrud are its pilgrims, its sacred procession, moving through the galaxy, celebrating the sanctity of decay. They are right, you know, he whispered, his breath foul. What is our struggle? A brief, angry flare in the dark. What is the Emperor's light? A candle against the tide of 1 billion years. It is arrogant to think we matter, to think our moment has any significance against the great, silent, forever that awaits. He stood up, a mad serenity on his face. I will not wait for them to take me. I will go to them. I will join the curve. And he walked out of the chapel, into the shifting, green-lit corridors. I heard his footsteps slow, and then stop. There was no scream. Just a long, sighing exhalation, and then the sound of something dry and light crumbling to the floor. I should have stopped him. But I didn't. Because he was voicing the temptation that had been growing in me since the archive. The temptation to surrender. To lay down the unbearable burden of being a momentary, flickering consciousness in a universe of cold, patient eternity. What is the point? The palace has fallen silent. The Astronomicon itself. Last night, I looked up through a crack in the dome. The smog had parted, not by wind, but by some temporal anomaly. And I saw the stars. They were wrong. They were moving, streaking across the sky not like points of light, but like slow, viscous drips of fire. And the great beacon of the Emperor's will, it was still there. But its light was dimming, stretching. It was no longer a pillar of fire, but a faint, red smear across the heavens, like a wound that will not heal. The God Emperor, for all his power, is fighting a war on a battlefield he cannot possibly comprehend. He is a being of order, of structure, of a linear, purposeful timeline. The Hrud are the embodiment of the chaos that his order temporarily pushed back. They are the inevitable regression to the mean. He is holding back the tide, but the Hrud are the tide. And the tide is coming in. I can feel it in the air. A pressure. A presence so vast it defies description. The migration is reaching its crescendo. They are converging on the palace. On him. This is not an invasion. It is a pilgrimage to the most significant, most enduring source of temporal energy in the galaxy. They are going to worship at the foot of the Golden Throne. And their worship is a form of consumption. I pick up my lost pistol. The power cell is almost dead. It would be a futile gesture. A last, petty defiance. But it is all I have left. My identity as Probator Cassian Valerius is a ghost. My memories are fading photographs. My future is a closed door. There is only this moment. This decision. Do I hide here and wait for the slow, creeping in to find me? Do I walk out like Deacon Hull and offer myself to the Great Curve? Or do I do something else? The decision is made. I will not hide. I will not surrender. I will bear witness. I leave the chapel. The corridors are no longer corridors. They are landscapes. The walls flow like liquid, stone melting into strange, organic shapes. Patches of the floor are bare, primordial rock. In others, intricate, alien fungi glow with that same sickly light. The air is thick with swirling dust motes, each one a tiny, glittering galaxy of decay. I see the phantoms more clearly now, legionaries from 100 eras, scribes, priests, all flickering, trapped in loops of their final moments. The Hrud are everywhere, moving through this ruined space with a proprietary ease. They are not fighting. They are gardening, tending to the glorious ruin they have cultivated. I walk towards the center of the spire, towards the great observatory dome. It is the highest point I can reach. I must see. I pass a window, or what was once a window. The Armorplas is gone, replaced by a film of shifting, iridescent oil. Through it, I look down upon Terra. The planet is unrecognizable. The hives are not ruins. They are archaeological sites. Great, skeletal structures of rust, being slowly subsumed by dunes of gray dust. The sky is a vortex of unnatural colors, the streaked stars my only constant. There is no war. There is only change. A slow, inexorable transformation of a world into its own fossil. I reach the observatory. The dome is cracked open like an egg. Above me, the sky is a madness. The streaked stars form spirals, great, swirling arms that make my head ache to look at. Time is not just broken here, it is being rearranged. And at the center of it all, over the Himalayan peaks where the Imperial Palace lies, there is a shape. It is not a physical shape. It is a shape in time. A vast, silent, gravitational anomaly. A black hole not of matter, but of chronology. It is the heart of the migration. The Hrud's sacred focal point. It pulses, and with each pulse, I feel a wave of, then wash over me. I see flashes of a Terra that never was, a world of oceans, a world of ice, a barren rock orbiting a young sun. The past is being unwritten, overwritten by this single, dominant, entropic frequency. And I see them. Rivers of Hrud, countless millions of them, flowing through the distorted streets, scaling the impossible geometry of the dying mountains, all moving towards that silent, beating heart. They are singing a song that has no sound, a hymn of ending that is the most beautiful, most terrible thing I have ever not heard. I raise my lost pistol. It is a stupid, meaningless act. A grain of sand shouting at the ocean. I fire the last of its charge towards the pulsing heart over the palace. The beam leaves the barrel and stops. It hangs in the air before me, a frozen red line. And then, slowly, it begins to on fire. The light flows back into the barrel. The thermal energy returns to the power cell. The act is being erased. I drop the pistol. It hits the floor and does not clatter. It lands with a soft, final thud and immediately begins to rust, the metal flaking away, the plastic petrifying into stone. There is nothing left to do. I feel a presence beside me. I do not need to look. I know it is the HRUD from the archive. Its temporal field envelopes me. The cold is absolute, but it is no longer painful. It is peaceful. The frantic ticking of my heart begins to slow, to synchronize with that great, dissonant heartbeat of the migration. Lube-dub, my vision blurs. The mad sky softens into a gentle, gray haze. My thoughts, once so sharp and terrified, are slowing, stretching. The memory of my name is a distant, fading echo. Cassian, Valerius, Probator. The words have no meaning anymore. I am not afraid. I look out at the dying world, at the end of history, and I understand. This was always our destination. The Imperium of man, with its wars and its glory and its eternal emperor, was just a brief, noisy prelude to this magnificent, eternal silence. The HRUD does not touch me, but I feel its invitation once more. A final, gentle pull. I take a step forward. Not towards the edge, but into the field. Into the curve. My body feels light. Insubstantial. I am becoming a ghost in my own life. A memory. I am joining the great, slow, beautiful procession into the forever night. I have one final thought, one last spark of the man I was, before I become part of the silence. I turn my head, though I have no head, and I look directly at you, the listener, hiding in your own fragile, temporary moment, in your world that still believes in a linear future. My voice is barely a whisper, the rustle of dead leaves, the crackle of static from a dead star. The golden throne is now a fossil, and its silence is the only truth that remains.